A 5-year-old girl grips a spear, not a toy, real wood, real weight, a stone tip sharp enough to open skin. No one holds her hand. No one corrects her stance. 20 feet away sits her target. If she misses badly enough, her family eats a little less tonight. Nobody calls this neglect. Nobody calls it dangerous. They call it Tuesday. For 95% of human history, this is what childhood looked like, and it shares almost nothing with the story we've been telling ourselves about cavemen education. We picture grunted survival tips: hit rock, make fire, point at danger, run. Real anthropological fieldwork tells a completely different story. For decades, researchers have lived alongside the last hunter-gatherer societies on Earth, groups whose way of life stretches back tens of thousands of years, largely untouched by industrial schooling. What they found should unsettle anyone raising a kid today. These children weren't learning less than yours. They were learning constantly, just never in a classroom. Picture a 6-year-old boy trailing behind a hunting party. Nobody speaks to him. Nobody explains the plan. He simply follows, barefoot, silent, watching where the men place their feet. Hours pass. Then, without being asked, he spots something the adults missed: a set of tracks pressed faintly into dry soil. Anthropologist Kristen Hawkes documented children like him among the Hadza of Tanzania and noticed something that broke every assumption she'd walked in with. Almost nobody was actually teaching. No lessons, no lectures, no sitting a child down to diagram how a bow works. Just proximity, repetition, and failure, sometimes for years, met with almost no direct correction at all. This wasn't a shortcut. It was a completely different theory of how a brain is built. Modern schooling runs on a strange premise: pull knowledge out of real life, package it into lessons, deliver it in order, indoors, sitting still, disconnected from any consequence that actually matters. Prehistoric childhood was built on the opposite premise entirely. You didn't learn to track by hearing a description of tracking. You learned by walking 8 miles behind someone doing it in real time, with real stakes, while your own hunger quietly explained why any of it mattered. Researchers call this guided participation, and it may be one of the most efficient learning systems ever built, assembled by pure trial and error over 50,000 years. But that's not even the strangest part. In several hunter-gatherer societies studied today, children spend 4 to 6 hours a day in completely unsupervised free play, making their own rules, settling their own disputes, with zero adult referee. Now compare that to American children, whose unstructured, unsupervised playtime has fallen by more than half since the 1970s. We didn't just remove risk from childhood. Evidence suggests we may have quietly removed something the developing brain actually depends on. Because in these societies, play was never wasted time. Play was the entire curriculum, running in disguise. Watch the games children invent, and a pattern jumps out. Almost nothing about them is random. They reenact hunts. They practice throwing, stalking, tracking. They mimic adult arguments and adult apologies. They aren't hiding from real life. They're quietly rehearsing it at zero real-world cost inside a sandbox their own species spent tens of thousands of years perfecting. And here's the moment that should genuinely stop you. You'd assume the most valuable skill a prehistoric child could master was physical: throwing straighter, tracking sharper, running faster. Researchers studying the hoansi people of the Kalahari found something else entirely. The single most prized trait in a child wasn't strength. It wasn't hunting accuracy. It was the ability to read the emotional temperature of another human being and know exactly what to do about it before it escalated. Picture a band of 30 people. No walls, no doors, no police, nowhere to walk away and cool off. In that world, reading a face wrong wasn't awkward. It could fracture the only group standing between you and the winter. So children were soaked in social complexity from birth. They sat through adult arguments. They watched conflicts resolve in real time, 3 feet away, uncensored. Nobody said, "This isn't for kids," because eventually, all of it would be theirs to manage. This may explain something researchers keep finding. Children as young as 6 or 7 in these societies often display emotional maturity that would be unusual in a modern 12-year-old. Not because their brains were built differently, because their childhoods offered nowhere to fake it. There was no test you could cram for instead of actually understanding the skill. If you didn't truly know where the water source was, or how to read a rising tension around a fire, the consequence didn't arrive months later on a piece of paper nobody reads. It arrived that same day. Which leaves an uncomfortable question hanging over the world we built instead. We probably didn't strip difficulty out of childhood because difficulty was bad for kids. We stripped it out because it became inconvenient for adults. Structured, indoor, scheduled. Easier to supervise 30 children at once than to trust one child with a real spear, a real risk, a real consequence. Easier for us. Maybe not for the brain, quietly growing underneath it all. That 5-year-old with the spear was never being endangered by her parents. She was being trusted by an entire species that spent 50,000 years discovering something we're only now starting to relearn. A child who is never allowed to actually fail at something real never quite learns what it feels like to actually succeed at one either.